Every New Mexican deserves to understand how the law works for them, or why it doesn't work for them. Welcome to New Mexico Legal Lowdown, hosted by attorney Feliz Rael. Each episode, we will help demystify the legal system and uncover misconceptions through real conversations with New Mexico trial lawyers. Produced and powered by LawPods.
This episode is brought to you by the New Mexico Trial Lawyers Association Alliance for Justice. We want to thank our La Justicia Circle supporters, Singleton Schreiber, Nick Rowley, Lori Benko, Sherry LaCour, and McGinn, Montoya, Love, Curry, and Sievers, PA. Through their generous investments, they're safeguarding New Mexicans' right to access justice and a jury. And now, on to our conversation. Hi, welcome to the New Mexico Legal Lowdown podcast. We are trial lawyers or plaintiff lawyers talking about the civil justice system in New Mexico. The laws in New Mexico may be different from the laws in other states. The purpose of the podcast is to provide general information and to demystify the civil legal process in New Mexico. This is not a substitute for appropriate legal advice in any particular case. Please contact a lawyer if you want to talk about your particular case. Today, I am happy to welcome Nick Mattison of Feferman, Warren, and Mattison. Nick, I want you to tell us about your work and your firm, but first, tell me what first made you decide to want to be a lawyer.
So I was not born in New Mexico. Not my fault. It's my parents' fault. But I came here a long time ago. It's been now almost 25 years. And I first came right out of undergrad. I went into a program called Teach for America, and they gave you options of different places you could go to be an elementary school teacher. And those of us who went into this program didn't have training as teachers, but there were places around the country that had teacher shortages and had alternative licensure programs. So we could go become teachers, take classes, and get our licensure as we were teaching. And on that list of places was Navajo Nation in New Mexico. And I was like, obviously I need to go there. So I put that as the only one that I wanted to go to and was lucky enough to have that placement. So right out of undergrad, I ended up in Theroux, New Mexico. For those of you who know, a tiny little town between Gallup and Grants on I-40, just sort of a border town of the Navajo Nation. And I taught there for a number of years at Theroux Elementary School in Gallup, McKinley County Schools. And as I was teaching there, I got to know some of the challenges that my students faced. And they were from individual challenges, like just the challenges of finding housing and the challenges that they saw when, trying to get loans and things like that in this small town, going all the way up to issues that I was seeing about issues of tribal sovereignty, being there in a border town of the Navajo Nation. And seeing all those issues made me kind of curious about how I could get involved in fighting some of those fights, and eventually led me to apply to law school.
That is excellent. Did you go to UNM Law School?
I did not go to UNM, no. I went out east, and then immediately after I was done, came straight back to New Mexico. Didn't do a single job interview out there. It was not my sort of place. While I was there, spent both of my law school summers coming out to New Mexico. I worked at DNA Legal Aid for one summer, worked in state government in Santa Fe another summer, and started to develop an interest in some of the things that I have ended up doing as a consumer protection attorney. But yeah, so right when I came back, I ended up working for Ed Chavez on the New Mexico Supreme Court for 1 year as a clerk, and then headed right back out to the Navajo Nation and spent another 4 years out there working legal aid.
Incredible. I've heard, I don't know Justice Chavez well, but he appears to be quite beloved by the legal community.
It was the very best experience that I possibly could have had coming out of law school to work for someone like him. It just an absolute privilege.
What a tremendous experience. Now, tell us a little bit about your firm and the kind of work that they do.
So yes, so firm's called Feferman, Warren, and Mattison. We're here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we do consumer protection law. So something that fits into that heading of being a trial lawyer or a plaintiff's attorney who helps people out when they've been injured, but a specific category of that And there aren't actually that many of us out there, just a few firms who do this work. So the background of it is as I was out there working at Legal Aid on the Navajo Nation again after clerking, a lot of the cases that I ended up seeing were people being taken advantage of by businesses, especially in border towns, folks who would go into Gallup or Farmington, get involved in a car deal or a pawn transaction or a predatory small loan, and that would end up talking to us at Legal Aid. So I started focusing my interest at Legal Aid in this area of law, which we call consumer protection law, which basically comes down to helping people out who've been ripped off by unscrupulous businesses. As Rob Trinan, who also does this work, says, we fight against businesses that lie, cheat, and steal, which is a great way of putting it.
That is totally accurate. I think at one point I contemplated going into that, and I don't know, somehow I was led astray, but I love hearing about it, and it sounds like unfair practices and the Unfair Practices Act actually has a lot of applicability to all kinds of cases. One thing our listeners or viewers might be interested in is whether it only pertains to people getting ripped off or whether it also pertains to people being injured.
Right. So it pertains to all those things. So the Unfair Practices Act is this New Mexico law that we enforce in probably 90% of the cases that we bring at this firm. There's also a number of different, very specific laws, like federal laws and state laws that apply to certain things like credit reporting or bank fraud or things like that. We do cases under those acts as well. But this law called the New Mexico Unfair Practices Act is this amazing tool that our legislature has created for the people of New Mexico that says when somebody has engaged in a deceptive trade practice or an unconscionable trade practice, something that takes advantage of people, you can bring a case under this law. You could potentially get your damages. Your damages can be tripled, 3 times whatever your damages are if you show that the business did the bad act willfully. And on top of that, you can get your attorney's fees. So it's a really powerful remedy, and it applies to all sorts of things, as you were saying, not just specific kinds of scams, but all sorts of deceptive business practices that may harm people. So it could apply to a car dealership that lies to somebody about the car that they're selling. That's something that we end up doing a lot of those types of cases. Car dealerships, credit reporting agencies, banks, these door-to-door solar companies, businesses like that lie, cheat, and steal. But also, this law can apply to people. I was just talking to somebody today who had a case, Tyler Atkins, who's one of our members, who has a case involving a nursing home that held out that it was going to provide all of these services to people and didn't provide services anything like what they had held out. And that's also covered by the Unfair Practices Act. So it's this really broad and important law that protects the people of New Mexico.
I think of it as sort of false advertising, a false advertising claim, but it's broader than that. It's for all kinds of, it's not just advertising, it's all of the things that they say and all the communications, both written and verbal, and all that's required is that someone be harmed from it financially or otherwise.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it can apply to all those things. It sort of started out, these types of acts started out with false advertising, and we still use it for false advertising all the time, for example, against car dealers. But yeah, it's much more broad than that and has extended its reach into a lot of different areas.
I think that nursing home case is so interesting, and I was not following it while it was happening, but really interested to read about it because I've also handled a bunch of cases against nursing homes. And I guess I've been practicing so long that I remember when judges would say, nope, unfair trade practices only applies to financial harm, not a physical harm. And so even though, for whatever reason, it really annoyed me that there was this chain of nursing homes that had, and they named each facility after a different saint, but they didn't have any like religious affiliation. And I felt that that was so deceptive to New Mexico residents because I know so many people that are really like faithful, and I knew that they would choose a facility because it was named after a saint. And I was so mad about that. And then eventually they went out of business because they do. But I'm pleased to hear that the judges and the court, maybe through the appellate courts, have gotten a little more relaxed about the kinds of cases that can be raised under the Unfair Practices Act.
Right. And in fact, the principles that lead to those broader types of damages have been in place in New Mexico for a long time, because I think what our courts have recognized is that the harm that comes from these financial crimes isn't just the money that gets taken out of your pocket. It's important that people get that money back, but the impact that it has on people's finances overall can be really huge. The impact that it has on their peace of mind when they realize that they're in a much worse financial situation than they were before because of misrepresentations by a business. That, I mean, that, in many ways is a larger and more important part of the injury that comes from this kind of deception than just however many dollars that you ended up losing out on. So when you look at cases that go back decades, the courts will talk about how the frustration, the aggravation, the time, all these different things that go into being taken advantage of by a business are important parts of being fairly compensated under our laws.
I want to hear more about the different kinds of businesses. Are there certain like industries that you think are more engaged in like who is a typical defendant? Understanding that it can apply to anyone engaged in commerce, right? Anyone who's operating a business. Like, I mean, theoretically, I could be sued for that also, right? Anyone who has a business and sells goods or services is needs to be aware of this, as well as their customers. But are there certain defendants that pop up more often?
There are, and so the law can apply, as you said, to sales of goods or services, or the extension of credit or the collection of debts.
Mm.
So fairly broad. And there are certain types of businesses that we tend to see more than others in our line of work. So I'll go down the list. The number one that we get a lot of complaints about is car dealers, and I think one of the reasons for that is that the purchase of a car for a lot of people is the major asset that they own. And it's an asset that's important for people's ability to lead their lives, to maintain their job, to get their kids to school, to do all the things that they have to do in life. So when someone gets taken advantage of at a car dealer, they're going to really need help, because it's potentially going to have, like we were just saying before, these much broader impacts than just being taken advantage of for X dollars. It's all of that stress that comes from having your life fall apart when you don't have a reliable vehicle. So the class,
Yeah, and like our culture in New Mexico, we're very car centric.
yes,
People love their, fancy cars and their old fashioned cars and their lowriders, and it's part of the culture of being Route 66. It's also a part of our logo.
yeah,
But also because we're a rural state and it's
yeah.
not easy. We don't have this fantastic train system, in public transportation, it doesn't make it easy for people to be able to go to work or to see their families or whatever. Cars are a big deal in New Mexico.
I used to have to explain that when I was out at Legal Aid on the Navajo Nation to our funders who didn't understand that there was not a public transportation option for folks. And also, you let people come in and you'd ask them kind of for the basic facts about what happened in this car deal. And maybe they got the car a year ago. And so as part of that initial interview, you'd say, well, how many miles have you put on my car since you purchased it? And they said, well, not that much, 40,000. That's probably like when you're out there, that's maybe standard for the number of miles that you have to put on the car in a year,
Yes.
going in to get groceries and going to get water and do all the things that you have to do. So yeah, it's a huge deal. So we see a lot of car dealer cases. In fairness, there are some car dealers that we never get complaints about at this office, because I think it's possible to run that business in a way that's respectful to the customers, and so to be fair to the industry that we're frequently suing. But when that business goes off the rails, it goes way off the rails, and we'll see car dealers that are selling people wrecked and unsafe vehicles without disclosing it, failing to transfer title to people. You'll see all sorts of false advertising about prices. You'll see false advertising to put people, in particular in the border towns of the Navajo Nation, to put people who may not be comfortable with English or with all the paperwork and that may not understand what's going on, to put them into really expensive vehicles by misrepresenting their income. And then, of course, the dealer gets immediately paid by the finance company and doesn't care if that borrower goes off and defaults immediately. So car dealers are a big thing. Increasingly, we've seen a lot of these solar door-to-door companies who are tricking people into these long-term contracts and then deceiving them about the terms of those deals. We also have quite a lot of cases about credit reporting, because these credit reporting agencies do not do what they need to do to make sure that false information doesn't end up on people's credit reports. There again, here's an area where there can be this huge impact on people's lives if their credit is much lower than it should be. And another area that we've increasingly seen is banks with unauthorized transfers, whether it's transfers out of checking accounts or unauthorized charges on credit cards. We've got these statutes that allow us to take care of these issues. And we're seeing increasingly that banks tell people you're out of luck, even if it's just some scammer that's like hacked into their account and taken money out. So that kind of gives you a
That's
flavor,
wild.
but like there's so many different things that we get on a daily basis,
Yeah.
different types of cases.
I bet that financial institutions will increasingly become a big target. I see so much of that in my work. And sometimes they're willing to, if it's a really sad case, they're willing to reverse the charges. But, there's a lot of gray area, right? Where if it's a member of their family or something, it's not necessarily, a complete stranger. Would you say, I'm for some reason, I'm thinking about the door-to-door solar salespeople. I mean, do you think that it's fair to say that perhaps with the exception of people leaving their business card, for like yard work or whatever, that the door-to-door salesmen are probably kind of sketchy?
Yes, our advice to people is, and I think you just came up with a good exception. If this is somebody who's
Yeah.
trying to get a little bit of work, fine. But by and
Although,
large,
to be honest, I feel a little bit shamed when I get that little business card that's like, we do yard work. And I'm like, what are you saying? I know I need to do yard work.
what we always say is, someone's coming door to door trying to sell you something. It is a scam. Just
Yeah.
don't do it. Just don't do it.
Right, right, right. Unless it's for yard work or perhaps like ice cream.
Yes, I'm willing to agree to those exceptions, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
anything else, no. You've got some great solar companies. That's the thing that's most frustrating about that scam, is that there are awesome solar companies, local solar companies in Mexico, who are totally ethical and are working to protect the environment. And
Yes.
unfortunately, you've had a bunch of these out-of-state companies coming in, taking advantage of tax credits and things like that to engage in some wild, unscrupulous deals. I mean, people who didn't
I
get entered into a contract at all. Like I talked to, without giving any details about this individual, a guy in his late 80s, like a veteran who had absolutely no access to the internet, who was tricked into putting solar panels on his roof by misrepresentations that it was like a project through P&M and was completely free. And then all of a sudden started having money taken out of his bank account and realized that his electronic signature had been fraudulently placed on this huge contract for these expensive panels. It's going to go on for decades. Crazy. So yeah, you see stuff like that.
That is wild. I think you're right. I do know of someone who I don't know if he owns or works for a solar company, and they're terrific, terrific people. But he's not the one going door to door.
Yeah.
Nor is anyone else in that company. The legit ones are not going door to door, I
Yeah.
think. Nick, tell me about one of your favorite cases ever. What sticks out in your mind as a really righteous lawsuit that you've been involved in?
I'll talk a little bit about a case that I had out of Gallup, because it sort of had a connection to the work that I did at Legal Aid. And it also, I think, is a good illustration of what we were talking about before with the large impacts that these sorts of financial misdeeds can have, far beyond just the dollar value of the transaction. So when I worked at Legal Aid, there was a woman who would come in. Her name was Mary, and seemed to be very upset, but also seemed to have some mental health issues, and we'd sort of struggle to figure out what was going on. And then what we did at the time was try to connect her with like shelters and just find her a place to stay. So time goes by. I come into Albuquerque, start working at this firm. We do some cases out in Gallup that end up in the Gallup Independent, so people kind of know who we are. And I get a call from somebody at UNM out there, and they say they also knew Mary, and she would stop by their campus from time to time. There's a smaller campus that was just on the north side of the highway. There's the main campus in Gallup on the south side, but a small campus just on the north side. And she would stop there, and they would let her come in and give her a cup of coffee and just let her hang out. And they came to know her over years and years. And they also knew some of the struggles that she was dealing with. And she was on the street. She didn't have a place to stay. And all of a sudden, one day she drove up in a brand new car. And the folks at this place said, "This is not right. This is unsafe." They knew that she didn't have a driver's license and couldn't be driving safely. Thank goodness that these folks were there and were willing to step up and look out for someone that they knew in the community. So they were able to convince her to give them the keys, and figured out that one of the big franchise new and used car dealers there in Gallup had just sold her this brand new car. And so they called up the dealership and said, "You've clearly made a mistake here. She doesn't have a driver's license. It's not safe for her to drive. She could hurt herself. She could hurt somebody else." And the people at the dealership essentially said, "Tough luck." She signed a contract. Deal's over. It's not our problem.
I can't believe they didn't even ask to see her driver's license.
But they knew that she didn't have a driver's license. So, as it transpired, my guess is that probably she had been stopping by there because you know how in the dealerships they'll have like a little popcorn and the sodas. She'd been stopping by, probably getting something to eat, and somebody eventually. This was not the only case that I had against this dealership. There was some wild stuff happening there, but at some point, someone had a look and said, "Well, here's a customer that we haven't worked with yet." Took her back. Anyone who knew her and understood what her situation was, but signed her up. But they had some challenges. For example, that she did not have a driver's license, which they knew because the finance company required a driver's license and required insurance. She was able somehow to get the financing to go through with just her state issued ID. They knew they had to get insurance though. So what they did is the salesperson went down to the local insurance agency, got an insurance policy in his name with her listed, but as an excluded driver. And somehow just her name appearing on the car insurance was enough to get this one financed. So financing went through. They sent her off driving with this vehicle. The game is that because she wasn't taking out a lot of loans, or she didn't have a credit history that would give her low credit. She had high enough credit that they were able to get financing by basically, by stealing her credit, essentially. Get her into that car, give the finance company as much as they needed in order to approve the financing, and then set her loose. They get paid by the finance company right away. They don't care if she ever pays. She can't possibly pay, and she can't use this vehicle. But they don't care about any of that stuff because they're going to get paid by the finance company right away, and then go on their merry way. So these folks over at the Gallup branch, after calling, knew my name from having seen some of the other work that I did, gave us a call, and we started this case to try to get this thing figured out for her. The bare financial impact for her was having this liability that she now owed the bank on this loan, had a vehicle that she couldn't use, and that's fine. We had to get that problem solved. We had to make sure that loan was eliminated and that she wasn't going to be held liable for that. But that wasn't really the essence of what that case is about, or what the importance of that case was. What that case was really about was making sure that the dealer was held responsible for placing her at risk, placing other community members at risk, for engaging in this outrageous business misconduct. And if we had just been able to go to them and say, "Okay, unwind the deal and let's, and we'll just give you the car back. That would be unjust. That would have not been a fair outcome of that case for her, or for the community, or for everybody else that ended up in that dealership potentially getting hurt." So
It would be permission to just keep doing business that way, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
If you can cheat, if they're doing something that wild, that crazy in this one instance, you know that they're doing it dozens of times, which I happen to know for a fact because we see them on multiple other occasions. And in many, many instances where they're not getting to my law firm, because I mean, the likelihood that even this case gets to my law firm is not that great. Most people who are in these situations never find a lawyer who's going to work for them
Right.
because it's hard. It's hard to figure out, who do I call? What do I do?
Sure.
It's so important in a case like that you have punitive damages.
Yeah.
The threat of that business is going to have to pay punitive damages, which is a multiple, hopefully a significant multiple of the actual financial injury to her, because otherwise, like you said, why not keep engaging in fraud? So we get caught 1 out of 10 times or 1 out of 100 times. And we've got
It
to,
would have been, yeah, so easy for them to say, oh, well, that's on the financing company. We got paid in full, we're done with this, right?
right. Right. So that was a fascinating case. Went on for quite a long time. Many complicated things to figure out to make sure we were doing right by her and to prove up everything we had to prove up in that case. But a great case, and that one always kind of stays with me. Is there were so many moments in that case that were very memorable. For example, she didn't have a phone. We couldn't call
Oh
her.
my gosh.
So
Wow.
but the defendant had the right to depose her. So when there were depositions scheduled, we would just drive out early. And I had some friends out in Gallup, and we would just drive the streets until we found her, and we would find her. I don't know why it was kind of amazing how things fell into place that seemed virtually impossible. The case was an enormous challenge, but it just seemed like the right thing to do and ended up being just really gratifying to help her out.
We want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by the New Mexico Trial Lawyers Association Alliance for Justice. We want to thank our Adobe Pillar supporters, Fadul, Clough, Hardy, and Conaway, LLC, Poulos and Coates, and Tani, Acosta, and Chaparro, PC. Through their generous investments, they're safeguarding New Mexicans' right to access justice and a jury. Now, back to our conversation. The other thing I want to point out about your story and this case is how wonderful it was that people were kind of looking out for her, right? And you never would have gotten that case, and that they would have, I mean, I can easily envision a scenario where, maybe because she hadn't been driving very long, wasn't qualified to drive for whatever reason, whether it was medical or whatever, she could have gotten into a car accident. She could have killed someone. And because people in the community just took the time to get to know her and know her situation and know when something was wrong, and they were willing to speak up, that how critical that was. And I see that especially in my financial exploitation cases. I think a lot of medical providers deserve a lot of credit for speaking up. Like, I had a case involving a guy who had a brain injury, his caregiver just dropped him off at the hospital and said he has dementia, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And he kept telling them, I know she's stealing all my money. And they humored him, I guess. He did have some mental health issues, but they humored him and let him call the bank, and they had a conversation with the bank, and it was enough to put a freeze on his bank account because in fact she was taking money. And I can think of other scenarios where, like, a medical care provider just has a suspicion of something going on, and it's enough for them to make a report to whoever is appropriate.
You
That's just so important, and it's often the difference between people getting hurt financially or otherwise and not. And so, yeah, I love it when people are actually take some initiative, and that's a lovely part of your story too.
There were a ton of people who helped out.
Yeah.
I heard what was going on. Even experts. We had a neuropsychologist who said, I'll drive out there too and just look around and see if I can. We were able to go and get an evaluation done, and I mean, these people who were willing to go above and beyond because they were like, this is wrong. This shouldn't happen.
And I mean, do you feel that, like, where does this come from? Like, this impetus to, like, lie, cheat, and steal? Like, is it that, do you think it was the employee who just was under a lot of pressure because he was like, I'm assuming it's a guy, I don't know why, but like, I mean, was the employee just under a lot of pressure, or was it the culture of the business? Or, I mean, what's your insight to that?
I think that it has to do with the culture of the business. And
Yeah.
you see this both in, I mean, you see it in the car dealers, you see it in these solar companies too,
Mm.
where you have a commission, especially these commission-based businesses, there can be extremely high pressure on especially lower level employees to perform. And if you have managers, I think that the problems with the culture typically come at the managerial level, and then creating an environment where those lower level employees are encouraged to and allowed to cut corners and do things that the manager should be supervising. But sometimes when these managers go off the rails, and especially if it goes all the way up to the ownership, which we see pretty frequently in the car dealer cases or in the solar company cases, and everyone is just, the message is, do whatever you have to do in order to turn a profit, in order to make sales. We don't care. There will be no consequences. And you've got people who are coming into these businesses who need a job and are really appreciative that they're in this business, and then they're being told by their managers, I don't care what you do, there's not going to be any consequence. You're not going to make a penny if you don't do this stuff. So, you know, push, push, push. That's when you start to see some of the crazy stuff happening.
Wow. I'm so glad that you took that case. And I'm glad that there's at least a handful of other lawyers who are skilled or courageous enough to take those cases.
And I think there's so many, it's in different areas of law. I was thinking about that, about when you talk to trial lawyers, whether they're consumer protection lawyers or in any other area, and ask them a question like what you asked me, like what's something, a memorable case to you, or what's an important cause that you took on, or a big fight that you took on. Every one of those people is going to have multiple stories. A lot of them will have a story about, here's one that I'm doing right now, and then they'll be able to go back through all the other ones that they've done over time, because that's what we do. That's why we're here.
And I especially like the cases where it's a defendant that I'm already familiar with, right? Because I get to apply what I've already learned about that business model and dig just be a little more sophisticated about what I can uncover. I find that really satisfying as well.
Yeah, you learn a ton. You
Yeah.
All sorts of fascinating things.
Oh my goodness. And, I don't know if you want to talk about this. Tell me how you feel about arbitration clauses.
It was on my list of things that I was hoping that we talk about. Whenever
Okay, good.
any size soapbox that I'm offered,
Hmm.
I have to jump up on it and say a word or two about this, because it's such an enormously important issue, but it's relatively low profile. I think lawyers know about this. I think the general public doesn't know about this. And
Agreed. Or they just don't have a choice.
well, they definitely don't have a choice. In fact, and I'll get to the spiel on kind of what these are, just because I want to sort of define what these are. But just a little while ago, I was buying a vehicle, and my practice has been, if there's an arbitration clause, strike it out, put my initials next to it. And general manager of the dealership came out and said, we will not sell you a car if you don't agree to this. And they can do that. But
Right.
here's what it is. So in the fine print of credit card contracts, cell phone contracts, when you're buying a car, when you're getting a car loan, when you're putting grandma in a nursing home, sometimes in employment contracts, in all variety of contracts, down there in that fine print are these arbitration agreements. And what the arbitration agreement says is, if you get hurt, you're not going to be able to bring your case in court. You're going to have to go to the separate private arbitration. It's going to have to be individual. So if there was a class of people that a dealer or a bank has been ripping off, they can't band together to try to get their money back for everyone. It's got to be individual. And it's subject to a much worse set of procedures than what we have in court. So in court, the great thing about our court system, our civil justice system in New Mexico, is that you are on an even playing field with the biggest bank. I have clients who come in here sometimes and they say, geez, this is, Wells Fargo or somebody else. Are you nervous about bringing a case? And I'll say, no, if we can be in court, I don't care how big they are. We are on an even playing field in court, and I can get discovery from them. They can get discovery from me, and we'll eventually go before a jury of New Mexicans, and they'll decide what's right, whether I win or lose. The reason that we have these arbitration agreements is because it pulls us out of that system into a much less favorable system in many cases, where there's no discovery whatsoever. I have cases now where sometimes I can fight the arbitration agreements because they're unfair and unconscionable, and so I don't have to go to arbitration. But there's some times where I can't fight that. And there are some cases where I show up, and now what the arbitrators will say is you get no discovery whatsoever. So as I was saying before, in court, you get discovery. I can find out what are the documents that you have. Have you done this to other people? I'll be able to talk to some of the people in the business and understand why this is happening. But in arbitration, you'll have arbitrators who say, you're going to get absolutely no discovery whatsoever. You're going to exchange exhibits, whatever the business wants to give you, they'll give you, and you turn over whatever you want to give them. You get no deposition. You don't get to ask them for other documents. You don't get to ask them any questions at all before the trial. And then we'll go to this arbitration and I'll decide what's right. That puts the consumer or whoever else at a huge disadvantage, which is why businesses are using them. And it has cut
There's
back.
that repeat customer bias, right? Because it's the unscrupulous businesses that end up in the arbitrations. And so they like walk in and they already know the arbitrator. It's, because they've already just written him a big check for the last arbitration he did for them.
And hey, in some of my cases, to be fair to the arbitrators, we have retired judges who I have a lot of respect for who are doing that. And what you're saying is absolutely true in some cases, but we've got some great people doing these arbitrations. But even if we've got amazing arbitrators, the rules are set up in such a way to fundamentally disadvantage the little guy in these cases.
Yeah.
Is that increasingly is very hard to fight against these. And so there are whole areas of business misconduct that are being sucked out of our court system and put into these private arbitrations, sometimes being made confidential so that nobody knows what's going on with these businesses. It is enormously abusive. And the only way to fix it is through legislation in Congress at this point. It cannot be fixed at the state level, except maybe marginally in some ways. The real fix is going to come through Congress. And hopefully we develop the political will to do this, because consumer cases like this should not be in arbitration. I have talked to a grand total of 0 clients who had any understanding that the contract hid these terms that were going to pull them out of the court system. So the suggestion that this is actually like the business and the consumer had some agreement that, we just wanted a more efficient way of resolving this dispute is ridiculous. Absolutely absurd and untrue. It's yet another scam that businesses are pulling on consumers.
Agreed. And anytime I've ever asked either the client or even, in a deposition, the person who presented the arbitration agreement, right? I asked them to explain what it is. And inevitably, they don't know. They say it's just a discussion to see if they can settle the case. They think it's mediation. They don't realize that arbitration is not at all mediation. And they don't realize that they're giving up their constitutional right to
Right.
trial by jury.
Yep.
And I mean, it was that constitutional right was so important. I mean, that it's part of the Constitution.
Right.
The idea that you can go in front of a jury and have it just be ordinary people is so important to our democracy, and yet it is taken away every single time. And I've had the same experience with you where I've tried to say, do I have to agree to this? And the answer is yes. What's the alternative? You don't get to get health care, or you don't get to, I think it's kind of unethical, but a lot of businesses do it.
The one piece of advice I can give to people is that some of these agreements contain a provision that says within 30 days you can opt out of this.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's just a part of the scam, because they know that no one can read all this and understand it and take advantage of that. So what they want to do is later on, when they're challenged, say, we gave them the chance to get out. They didn't even do that. So that itself is a scam. But any of you who are out there listening, if you have one of these agreements, read through it. If you've got that right to opt out, do it. Get out of it so you can take these people to court. It's not a solution to the overall problem, because that means that one out of 100,000 people is going to be able to bring your individual case in court, and everybody else is stuck in arbitration. But it's something that you can do. What we really need is legislation.
It is important. I'm so glad you were willing to talk about it. I think that sometimes lawyers talk so much about it, and it's such a technical, like, legal term that people are like, I don't know. or it is important. And we spend a lot of time talking about it. I'm glad you were willing, because I didn't know if maybe you've had enough thinking about it this
We
week.
fight about it all the time. I was fighting about it in court this morning. We fight it all the time.
Oh my gosh. Well, in that case, let me ask you about something more fun. Unless there's something else you want to chat about, I'm happy to talk about anything else that you think is important for the public to know about the kind of work you do.
No, I think that we've covered a lot of it. I hope that people understand that that there are lawyers, what few of us there are, but there are lawyers out there doing this particular area of consumer protection work, and that we can help with some types of cases that I think people sometimes think are hopeless. For
Yeah.
example, credit reporting. A lot of people feel like if there's something wrong with their credit, the only option is to go to another scam company. There are these sort of scam credit repair type organizations that they'll pay money to. But there are actually lawyers out there who can bring powerful cases to actually eliminate this stuff and fix it. And similarly, when people have money that's taken out of their bank accounts through these unauthorized transactions, or they have credit card transactions, really, like I said, generally, any kind of like business transaction that just feels like it's unfair and deceptive. There are consumer protection lawyers who do this kind of work, and we're happy to hear from people. So I really appreciate you bringing some light to the kind of work that I do.
Feel like at some level, all of us have been victims of unfair trade practices, right? And the question is to what extent? Some of us, if we're very careful about like monitoring our bank accounts, and sometimes it's not easy because we all have a million things to do. But I mean, I know that I've been scammed and I see this charge and I'm like, oh God, I know exactly what that is. But I feel like if it's, $20 or something, I feel like sometimes I'm willing to let it go just because I don't want the aggravation.
Yeah.
And at the $20 level, okay, no big deal because I'm fortunate and that's just I can say that it's not a big deal. But that is a big deal to other people. And I feel like so many companies they start off small, right? It's $20 or $5 and then they see if they can get away with $50. It's like
Right.
when someone takes your wallet or something and they try to buy gas for $5 just to see, and it's just this amplification to see what they can get away with. So I think it's so important to hear from you and lawyers who do the work you do because we're all victims of it. No, I don't think anyone has ever escaped being a victim of that kind of abuse. It's just a matter of the extent, and some people can afford it better than others. And it's especially terrible for people who can't afford it because I mean, why should we tolerate that, you know?
One of the great things about this work has been being able to bring those cases that to, some big business seems like it's just change. It doesn't mean anything. It's a tiny amount of money, but to that individual, they come into me and they say, this a huge deal. I know it's not a lot of money, but they've taken my life savings out of my bank account. It's gone. And I'm able
Right.
to get in and I'm able to represent those people. And I'm able to do it in a way that doesn't cost me anything because we're do contingent fees like most trial lawyers, and get them that all that money back and get them that full relief and fix this enormous problem that they can't fix otherwise. So it's a gratifying part of the work. And we continue to this day, despite having done it for many years, to take all from the huge cases down to what seem like relatively small cases, but are a big deal to our clients.
That's a really important point to emphasize, I think, which is that for unfair trade practices cases, you get to ask for your attorney fees, which is an exception to the general rule that everybody has to pay their own attorney. I love the fact that at some point our elected officials decided that this is important enough work that you get to claim your attorney fees as part of, being successful with the claim. And it's so rare to see that in just about any other area of law, unless it's a contract where that's specifically written into the contract. I think that that's important and I hope it continues for forever. So, Nick, here's the fun part of the interview. Tell me about your favorite day trip and or your favorite meal at a restaurant in New Mexico.
All right. It was all fun. This isn't just a fun part. It was all fun. And thank you for talking
Ah,
about that
yay.
stuff. Okay. I'm gonna let everybody in on something. This is the result of a significant amount of research over a number of years. But this is the perfect New Mexico Christmas road trip. And here's how it's done. Get out a pen. The times
Okay,
are
I've got
important.
it.
You can come back to the recording so you don't have to write it all down. But here's what you're going to do. You're going to leave Albuquerque somewhere around 9:30 or 9:45 in the morning. Everybody else is going up to Santa Fe. You're going to go the opposite direction. You're going to go out to Tijeras. You're going to stop at the Roots Farm. You're going to get yourself a cappuccino and a pastry, and be ready for what's about to happen, because you're going to go off the beaten path. You're going to head south, and you're going to go to the salt missions first. You're going to go down to Quarad, which is before you get to Mountain Air. It's really not that far south. If people haven't been to the salt missions, you must go to the salt missions and check it out. The ruins of these old Spanish missions and these really wonderful sites where you can walk around and really get a sense of what it was like to be in these churches, because the walls are still there. The site is amazingly well preserved, and they have great interpretive materials and stuff. You're going to go there. You're going to check it out. Then you're going to head down to Mountain Air for lunch. You're going to go find some interesting restaurant in Mountain Air. Whatever is open, you're going to try it out because it's going to be good. And then you're going to walk around Mountain Air a little bit, go check out a gallery, go to that grocery store they have there where you can get some local honey and some local beans. And then you're going to head out and you're going to go to Abo, which is another one of the salt missions. You're going to get there about 2. These times are important. Don't ignore the times. You're going to walk around Abo, see another beautiful salt mission with the manzanos there in the grounds. And then you're going to head out and you're going to go to the Lad Gordon Wildlife Refuge. I said this was a Christmas road trip. You must do this during Christmas break. No other time will work.
Okay.
Get there, and this is really important. This is the most important time, and this is why I've been giving you the times leading up to this. You're going to get there about 3 o'clock or 3:15. You're going to drive over the ponds. You're going to park, and then you're going to walk all the way around that road, which is 2.5, maybe 3 miles, starting at about 3 o'clock or 3:15. Because what that's going to do is, first of all, you're going to have a beautiful walk. The weather's going to be amazing. The views are gorgeous. And then just as you're coming back around towards your car, the sun is going to be going down. I've timed this out. And all the birds are going to lift off and fly right over you to the ponds. And you're going to enjoy that. And then you're going to get back to your car. Maybe you'll walk over the ponds, check it out as they land, and listen to them talking to each other. And you're going to head down to the Owl Cafe. You're going to have a hamburger at the Owl. And then you're going to drive back up. You're going to get back to Albuquerque, maybe 8 o'clock or 8:30. It's a long day, but trust me, it is the very greatest New Mexico Christmas road trip. So there you go.
Oh, that sounds incredible. Wow. I don't know if it was Abo or the other one, but I went one time and it is incredible. And there were baby owls in like one of the like little window areas. And I could not believe it. And on a separate trip, I have been to the waterfowl management area, and it's incredible. I think people I don't know if people know about it, they're not talking about it, but I agree. I've never done it all at once, but I think, not necessarily on Christmas Day, but on Christmas break, I might just have to do that. Nick, thank you so much. Really enjoy talking to you. I always enjoy talking to you, but I'm so glad that we got to just talk about the work you do, and hopefully people learned something today.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great.
Yeah. All right. Talk to you later. Bye. Before we wrap up, we want to thank our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by the New Mexico Trial Lawyers Association Alliance for Justice. We want to thank our Chili Circle supporters, the Tracy Law Firm, and Curtis & Company. Through their generous investments, they're safeguarding New Mexicans' right to access justice and a jury.
Thanks for joining us on New Mexico Legal Lowdown. If today's conversation changed how you see the legal system, share it with a friend. We'll be back next time with another trial lawyer fighting for New Mexicans. Produced and powered by LawPods.